Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom and welcome back to today's Daf, which is Eruvin Daf Samach Gimel. We're on the last line of Samach Beis on Beis. Said the Gemara, Rav Chizda Oiri B'Kafri. Rav Chizda ruled on a matter of halacha in the town of Kafri, B'Shnei de Rav Huna, in the lifetime of Rav Huna. The Gemara is picking up the discussion we began yesterday regarding the halacha that a Talmud is meant to refrain from being Moira halacha, ruling on a matter of halacha in front of his Rebbe. Now, Tosfos here points out, based on the upcoming Gemara, that this halacha contains really two categories. There is a standard Talmud, a Talmud Muvhak, somebody who learned most of his Chachma, his Torah from this Rebbe. This was something more typically found in the time of Chazal, where they stuck with the same Rebbe throughout. So this Talmud must refrain from being Moira halacha throughout the entire lifetime of his Rebbe, whether or not he's actually in front of his Rebbe or not, because as a Talmud, he's not meant to assume this mantle of authority during the lifetime of his Rebbe. So whether it's in front of him or shalai b'fanav, not in his presence, he cannot rule on matters of halacha. However, there's a lower level of a Talmud called a Talmud Chaver, a student colleague. So he's equal to the Rebbe in Chachma, but he learns something from him. So he needs to accord him some form of respect. He's not like a real Talmud who cannot assume an authority, can't paskin a shayla, but he must accord honor to the Rebbe. So it means in the home turf of the Rebbe, in his city, in front of him, he must not interfere with his authority, and therefore he cannot be moira halacha, rule on a matter of halacha if he's in the presence of the Rebbe. But if it's shalei b'fanav, if it's in a different location, then certainly he's allowed to proceed and rule on halacha. And this was the case with Rav Chizda, who was a Talmud Chaver of Rav Huna. So if he would have been a real Talmud, then he couldn't take the liberty to paskin even in Kafri, which was not the place where Rav Huna lived. Rav Huna lived in Pupadisa. But since he was only a Talmud Chaver, he took the liberty and he was Oiri B'Kafri, ruled on a matter of halacha in Kafri, which was not the place of Rav Chizda. Rashi brings that Rav Chizda lived in Pupadisa. And this was done B'Shnei de Rav Huna, even during the lifetime of Rav Huna. Continues the Gemara. Likewise, Rav Amnuna, Oiri B'Charta d'Argis, he ruled on a matter of halacha in the town called Charta d'Argis. Rashi says the Charta was the name of the city. Argis was a fellow who built the city, so it was a town built by this person Argis. When did Rav Hamnuna paskin a shayla? B'shnei de Rav Chizda, during the lifetime of Rav Chizda, because Rav Hamnuna as well was a Talmud Chaver of Rav Chizda. Therefore, as long as it was not in his presence, he was allowed to rule on a halacha. Continues the Gemara. Ravina sar sakine b'Bavel. He checked a knife, a shchita knife, in Bavel. Let's take a look at Rashi. Second line from the top. Ravina sar sakine badak sakin l'tabach. He checked the shchita knife for the sheichet. Now, one is meant to show the knife to the Rav of the city. V'lo amru laharis sakin l'chacham elo pnei kvoida shel chacham. So one is meant to check the knife prior to shchita. And the Gemara in Chul Daf Yudam Beis tells us, we're meant to show it specifically to the Chacham, the Rav of the town, to give him kavod. Now, Ravina, who checked the knife in Bavel, says Rashi, it seems that he was taking sort of the kavod away from Rav Ashi, who was his Rebbe, who also lived in Bavel. V'nimtzu Ravina noitele ateres kvoideir. He's taken this honor, the honor of the head of the city. V'Rav Ashi Rabbi b'mata machas yava. Although he had a Rebbe, Rav Ashi, who lived in Mata Machasya, a different section of Bavel. So Ravina, who checked the knife, was not actually in the location of his Rebbe in Mata Machasya, it was in a different place in Bavel. Says the Gemara, Amali Rav Ashi, my time of Marhachi. Why did he do this? Rav Ashi challenged him. How could you check the knife and negate the honor of the Rebbe? In this case, it was him himself, Rav Ashi. Ravina responded, we found that Rav Hamnuna did rule on a halachic matter in the town of Charta Dargis in the lifetime of Rav Chisda because it was Shalei B'fanav. It was not in his presence. So likewise, what I did was not in your presence. Amar le lo yoiri itma. So Rav Ashi responded, actually the correct version of the events was lo yoiri. Lo yoiri itma. We learned that he did not rule. Meaning Rav Hamnuna did not issue a ruling, even though he was not in the presence of Rav Chisda. Amar le, so Ravina responded, look, itmar yoiri. We have one version of events that he did rule. V'itmar lo yoiri. We have another version, the one that you mentioned, in which case he did not rule. So it seems to be a contradiction. Apparently, the proper resolution is as follows. Bishnei de Rav Huna Rabbi Hu de lo yoiri. In the days, the lifetime of Rav Huna, his Rebbe, he didn't rule. Why? Because Rav Huna was his real Rebbe. And since he's a Talmud Muvak of Rav Huna, he did not allow himself to issue a halacha during the lifetime of his Rebbe, whether or not he was in his presence. Because a Talmud Muvak is not meant to assume the mantle of authority. He's a Talmud. And therefore he cannot rule regardless of the location. So that explains the version that says that Rav Hamnuna did not rule on halacha. The other version where he's described as, yes, issuing a halacha, v'oiri b'shnei Rav Chisda. During the lifetime of Rav Chisda, he did rule. As is the version we had in the Gemara earlier, that he ruled a halacha matter in Charta Dargis during the lifetime of Rav Chisda, because it wasn't in his presence. So he didn't hesitate, although it's during his lifetime. Why the Talmud Chaver de Le'ava? Because he was a Talmud Chaver of Rav Chisda. So Rav Hamnuna was a Talmud Muvak, a true Talmud of Rav Huna. Therefore, during the lifetime of Rav Huna, he totally refrained from being Meira Halacha, even if it was Shaloi B'fanav. Whereas during the lifetime of Rav Chisda, after Rav Huna's passing, during the lifetime of Rav Chisda, in this case, he took the liberty because it was not in his presence, because he was only a Talmud Chaver of Rav Chisda. He needs to be careful in front of him. But Shaloi B'fanav, it's okay. So that must be the pshat to reconcile the two versions of events. Based on that, continued Ravina, and he said like this: Vano Nami, and myself, I too, Talmud Chaver de Marna. I'm merely a Talmud Chaver of you, of Ravina, of Rav Ashi, I mean. And therefore, certainly in your presence, I have to be extra careful, but what I did was not in your presence. It was in a different location. Therefore, I'm allowed to rule a halacha. I just can't interfere with your home turf. Therefore, what I did was fine. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav, getting back to the concept of checking the shchita knife prior to shchita, Rashi explained the Chacham required the sheikha to show it to the Chacham, to give him kavod, to establish his authority. Amar Rav, tzur ben rabban, a Talmud Chacham, chazil nafshei. He's allowed to check his own knife prior to shechting his own animal. It's his own personal thing. And therefore, just as he can personally conduct himself according to his own halachic rulings, he doesn't need to go to the Rav. If he knows the halacha, he can follow it. Likewise, he can check his own knife. It's his personal matter. It's not considered to be a negation, a public negation of the Rav's authority. Continues the Gemara. Ravina ikla l'Mechoza. Ravina came to the town of Mechoza, which was the town of Rav. I see ushpiz chane tzakina. So his host brought him a knife that he was going to use to shecht an animal, and he was showing it to Ravina, so that he can check it for him prior to the shechit. Amar lei, so Ravina responded, Zilan Tayla Rava. Go and bring it to Rava, who is the chacham of the city. I can't check the knife for you. Amar lei, so the host responded to his guest. He says, Lo savar lo mar hada amar Rava. Do you not agree with Rava's statement? Rava himself said, Tzur b'rabban chaz nafshei. A Talmud Chacham could check his own knife. So a layman who can't check his own knife, he's going to have somebody check it, sure. You have to show it to the Rav. But a Talmud Chacham who has the ability to go check his own knife, he can do so without showing it to the Rav. So why can't you check the knife without going to Rav? Amar lei, anam mizban zavina. So Ravina says, look, if it's my own private animal, yeah, it's my own private business, but this is your animal. I'm your guest. I'm going to be purchasing the meat from you. I'm here for pay. It's a commercial enterprise here. Therefore, it's not considered like my private animal, like my private personal affairs. If I were to check your knife for you, I'm going to be negating the covet of the Rav, of Rava. Therefore, you must go show it to him. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Lazar Magronya, so that was his name. Rabbi Abba Bar Tachlifa. So these two, Iklu Rav Acha Bre Darvik. They visited the home of Rav Acha Bre Darvik, because he was their host. Ba'asrei to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. And this was in the city of Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, who was the Chacham there. He was the Rav. So what happened? Boy Rav Acha Bre Darvik. So the host wanted lemevedlu igla tilsa, to prepare for them a high quality calf. What is igla tilsa? Rashi will explain for us. Isis akina v'kol machvilu. So he brought along the knife and showed it to them, so they can check it for him. Amar lu Rav Acha Bar Tachlifa. So Rav Acha Bar Tachlifa, who was one of the two guests, he turned to them and he said, should we not be concerned about the honor of Saba, the elder, the Chacham, who was Rav Acha Bar Yaakov? We have to show it to him. Amalahu Rav Elazar Magrunya. So the other guests, Rav Elazar Magrunya, responded to them, Hachiyam Rava. Isn't this what Rava said? Sur b'merabban chaz nafshei. A Talmud Chacham could check his own knife. There's no need for us to trouble ourselves to go show it to the Rav. Chazi v'yanish Rav Elazar Magrunya. So Rav Elazar Magrunya proceeded to check the knife, and he was punished. Says, what did he do wrong? He was following proper procedure. Didn't Rava say that a Talmud Chacham check his own knife? Shani Hasan, there it was different. Because they began discussing the covet of Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov. Should we show it to him? Should we not show it to him? So once the subject was brought on the table, so when Rabbi Elazar Magrunya proceeded to check the knife, he was ignoring the topic. He was kind of negating the covet of Rabbi Acha Bar Yaakov. And in this case, he was punished. So, if it wouldn't have been brought for conversation, yeah, he could have checked the knife. But once it became a topic of discussion, it seemed like he was negating it by ignoring it and proceeding to check it himself. As a result, he was punished. Another pshat, Shani Rav Acha Bar Yaakov the muflik. It's different because Rav Acha Bar Yaakov was muflik. He was extra old, extra chacham. And in that case, even a Talmud Chacham should go show him the knife. He deserves extra honor. Let's take a look at Rashi inside. So it's about 17 lines from the top, beginning with the words Egla Tilsa. So there were two guests who came to this home, and he wanted to offer them an Egla Tilsa, this calf. What does Tilsa mean? Gadol Shlish, which has grown to a third of its size, of its maturity. At that point, it is at the highest point of quality. Be'ikar tam basari. That's the time when the flesh has the best taste, because it's not a magadan oisan ashiyu mishaloshin, and to raise it until that point. It is common to raise the calves up to that point when it is considered to be at its point of highest quality. Another pshat. It was a third born calf, so the third born by his mother. The kashali, Rashi finds this difficult. Ha da amar ba'alma, because the Gemara elsewhere in Sanhedrin says like this: Rav Chanina, Rav Oishia have asku b'sevi yitzira. They were involved in learning sevi yitzira, Kabbalah, right? V'chol mali shabasa, ivri lehu igla tilsa. Every Erev Shabbos, it was created for them a igla tilsa. They had it the covered Shabbos through their involvement in learning and discussing Sevi Yitzir. Now, igla tilsa there could only mean one thing: high quality. It can't mean third born. The hasa my shlishi lebetanika. It can't mean that it was a third born. It was never from the mother. It was never born. So Rashi proves from there that igla tilsa apparently means a third of its size and at the point of its highest quality. So that's what he wanted to offer them, and he wanted to have them check the knife. So one of the guests responded, what about the elder? What about the Rav? Should we not be concerned with a covet? The Rav Achbar Yaakov, Kamar. He was wondering. And the Gemara says that Rav Lazar Agronia proceeded to check the knife and he was punished. The question was, why? So the first answer was, Das Chil B'Kvoide. Since he was told, it was suggested to him, let's take into account the honor of the Saba, of the elder Rav here. They began discussing and getting involved in the concept of honoring the Rav. He shouldn't have ignored it and negated it. By saying another pshat, he was very old and a great chacham, so a person of such great stature cannot be ignored, and they should have gone and showed him the knife. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rava, despite the fact that we just said that a Talmud is not meant to rule on matters of halacha in front of his Rebbe, but there are some exceptions. If the point is to prevent somebody from doing an isser, even if it's in front of his Rebbe, it's okay. Let's take a look at Rashi, right off to the right side. Says Rashi, Ra Talmud, let's say this Talmud sees a person, Adam, who's about to do an Avera. And whose Rebbe who happens to be there is keeping quiet for some reason. In that case, the Talmud can take initiative. Mutal the Talmud can jump ahead and raise his voice and prevent him from doing this. Why is this different? The Gemara soon will explain. Continues the Gemara. Ravina Hava Yosef Kamei Ravashi. It was an incident where Ravina was sitting in front of Ravashi, who was his Rebbe, as we mentioned earlier. Chazialu Gavra. So Ravina, who was the Talmud, noticed his fellow, the Ka'asel Lechamre, Bid Sinsa B'Shabbat. He was tying up his donkey around a palm tree. One is not meant to use a tree on Shabbos, might pull off a branch. He's doing an isr. Rama Bey Kala. So Ravina raised his voice at him, and the fellow ignored him. Omar Le, so Ravina said to this fellow, this person should be in Shamta, a form of Cherem, Nidui. So he ruled on a matter of halacha in front of his Rebbe. Omar Le, so Ravina asked Ravashi, this type of behavior that I just exhibited, does it appear like afkirusa, meaning like negation of your honor? Amar Le, Rav Ashi said, certainly not. I agree wholeheartedly with what you did. The pasuk says, Ein chachma, vein tfuna, vein eitza neged Hashem. What do we learn from there? The concept of chachma, of wisdom, of tfuna, of understanding, of eitza, a person who's an advisor. All these people of high stature don't have a place leneged Hashem when it's in reference to Hashem's honor. Any situation which involves a potential chilul Hashem, ein cholkin kavod l'Rav. We do not grant respect to the Rav. You did very well by taking initiative and trying to control the situation, a situation where a person was about to do an avera, which is a chilul Hashem. Now, actually, Tosfos earlier mentions that this whole concept of a Talmud refraining from issuing a ruling on a matter of halacha is only if it contains two elements. Number one, that it's halacha l'maisa. So somebody approaches the Talmud regarding a practical matter. So the Talmud is not meant to advise him how to proceed, but if it's just discussing learning, having a learning discussion, and the Talmud will say, look, it appears to me like this sheet is the correct one, that's okay. That's not considered to be an affront to the Rebbe's authority. Number one. Number two, says Tosfos, that let's say this person approaching the Talmud knows that this is a known halacha. He asks him something which is so obvious, everybody knows. He just wants to, he happens not to know. So that's okay. It's only a concern when it's a dvar chiddush, something which to the petitioner appears like something original, something new, something which is not really commonly known. In that case, it's viewed like a halachic ruling. He's giving respect to the Talmud, who's going to issue a halachic ruling here. In this case, it's considered to be an interference with the Rebbe's authority. So both of those elements need to be present in order for it to be a concern for the Talmud to be Moira halacha. Okay, and now we have another exception, which is to prevent an Isser from happening. There's no concern of it covered Rav. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav, b'fun of Aser v'chayv misa. So if a Talmud is Moira halacha in the presence of his Rebbe, it's Aser, and not only is it Aser, it's chayv misa. Chayv misa b'dei shamayim. He's negating the entire system of the transmission of Torah, which is meant to come from a Rebbe to a Talmud to the next Talmud. So if one interferes with the authority of a Rebbe, he's negating the entire system that we have, our whole tradition of the Masorah, of the transmission and the handing down of Torah, and the result of that is chayv misa. But that's only if it's b'fanav. Not only is he assuming the mantle of authority, but he's actually directly confronting the Rebbe. He's negating in his presence. But if it's shaloi b'fanav, if it's not in his presence, sir. In this case as well, the Talmud, we're speaking about a true Talmud, he's not allowed to rule on matters of a halacha. But in this case, it's not so terrible as if it's b'fanav and chayv misa, it doesn't involve chayv misa. Says the Gemara, shaloi b'fanav loy? Is that the case that if it's shaloi b'fanav, there's no misa? V'atanya, we learned in the Brayso. Rabbi Lezer Omer, loy meisu b'nei Aaron? You know why the two sons of Aaron passed away? It was only because because they issued a halachic ruling in front of Moshe the Rebbe. My drush. What drasha did they say? What halacha did they teach in front of Moshe? The pasuk says, "V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakoyin eish al mizbeach." That the b'nei Aaron are meant to place an eish on the mizbeach. Now we know that there was already a heavenly fire present on the mizbeach hachitzin. Nevertheless, the Torah seems to indicate it's not enough. The kohen is meant to contribute additional fire, worldly fire, earthly fire. Amr, they said like this: Afal pisha eish, you read this min hashamayim. Although the fire comes down from heaven, mitzvah lahav min hedit. We're meant to add our personal fire to it. So this was a halacha that they dictated in front of Moshe, and that's why they were deserving of misa. The Mashal points out that indeed the wording in the pasuk is indicative of this, because the pasuk says that the Bnei Aaron brought eish zara asher litziva oisam. What does eish zara mean? A strange fire. So this is the additional fire that they required, in addition to the heavenly fire that was already present on the Mizbeach. Now one saw that Rosh Shraga Feivel Menlowitz, the founder of Torah Das, used to quote this Gemara, and he said that his firm would say that this applies to us on a daily basis. That we know there's an eish that's Yeredes Mashamayim. Hashem provides us with heavenly inspirations, Yatu Shmaya. But a person gets it when he initiates. He takes that first step. Mitzvah lahavim in a hedit. We have to contribute our personal part of inspiration, and then we get that eish that's Yeredes Mashamayim. Can't suffice with heavenly fire alone. Is a mitzvah lahavi min a hedit as well. Okay, so in any case, the Bnei Aaron issued this halachic ruling in front of Moshe, and that's why they got misa. So this is the Brayso, and continues the Brayso. But Talmud echad hoyloi the Rebbe Lezer. There was this certain Talmud of Rebbe Lezer, shayir halacha for b'fanav, who paskin the halacha in front of him. Amar Rebbe Lezer, li meshalem ishtay. So Rebbe Lezer turned to his wife, whose name was Ima Shalom, and he said, Tmiani, I wonder, im yoytzi zeh shnasei. I'll be surprised if he makes it through the year. And he didn't. So his wife told him, how did you know that he wasn't going to live another year? Naviyata, are you a Navi? I'm neither a Navi or a son of a Navi. Elokach mikublani. I have a Kabbalah. Kol hamoira halacha v'nei rabbi, chayv misa. A Talmud who is moira a halacha in front of his Rebbe is chayv misa. So that was the end of the Brayso. Continues the Gemara. V'amar Rabba bar Achana Omer Yochanan. Oisei Talmud, Yehuda ben Guri Shmoi. You know what this Talmud's name was? His name was Yehuda ben Guri. V'yirachik mimenu shalosh parsais. he was actually situated 3 parsa, which is 12 mil, away from Rabbi Lezer. So apparently, although it was not in his presence, it was shalei b'fanav, he still got misa. And this seems to be a kasha. Ravo tells us that only if the Talmud is moira halacha b'fnei Rabbi, he gets misa. In this case, he was so far away, it wasn't b'fanav. Now, why is this number of 3 parsois being cited as a benchmark to determine whether or not it's b'fanav? So Taisus points out that the source for this number seems to be from the Bnei Aaron. We just said they were chayiv misa because they were moira halacha b'fnei Moshe. Presumably, it wasn't directly in front of him; it was somewhere within the machne, and we know that the machne was of this size. It was 3 parsa, which is 12 mil, and we see that they were liable to misa. So we see that anyway, within this vicinity of 3 parsa is still considered to be home territory, the home turf of the chacham, of the rav, of the rebbe, and it's considered to be b'fanav. But in any case, Rabbi Bar Chana tells us, and then Rav Yochanan, that this Talmud, who was chayiv misa, was far away from his rebbe. So we have a kasha on Rav, it says, b'fanav hava. Actually, the halachic ruling took place in front of his rebbe. He actually resided 3 paras away, but the story itself, the moira halacha, took place in front of him. Says the Gemara, "V'harachik menu shalosh parasas kama." Rabbi Rachana tells us he was 3 paras away from Rabbi Lezer. Now, apparently, it was pertaining to the story. It was within the context of the brisa here, meaning he's trying to teach us something, that the halacha took place 3 paras away. Why would he just be telling us about his place of residence, which is irrelevant to the matter at hand? According to you, Shmoi b'shem aviv lama. Why did he have to go into such great extent to relate his personal information, his name, his father's name? There's a purpose to that. Now one shouldn't think that it's just a mashal, a metaphor. It didn't actually take place. That's why he needed to inform us his personal details, his name, his father's name, and the place where he resided. But really it's just his place of residence. The actual halachic ruling took place in front of Rabbi Lezer, meaning within 3 parsa vicinity, which is considered to be b'fanav, and that's why there was misa, and this is consistent with Rav. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rab Chia bar Abba Amar Rab Yechon. Kol ha'moira halacha v'nei Rabbi, roi lakisha nachash. If one rules on a halachic matter in front of his Rebbe, he is deserving of being bit by a snake. Why specifically a snake? Mashal says because who was the first creature who defied his Rebbe? It was the Nachash, way back. When he negated Hashem's words, he told Chava to eat the Eitz Hadas. So he was the first one who negated the covenant, the authority of his Rebbe. It says the Mashal, it's midah keneged midah, measure for measure. A person who behaves himself in this manner, who negates his Rebbe, Roy Lakisha Nachash, he's deserving to be struck by a snake who embodies this type of behavior. Shenemar, where do we find this connection to a snake? Vayan, Eliu and Brachal Abuzi Vayim Etzar and Eliyam, I'm too young. Al Ken Zochalti, I'm afraid to voice my opinion in front of the elders. Uksiv im Chamas Echli Afer. So he employed the term of Zachalti, and we find elsewhere that Zechli Afer, these crawling creatures, these snakes. So apparently Zachalti is indicating that the suitable punishment for this type of behavior, for defying your Rebbe, is the Zechli Afer being bit by a snake. Ziri Amar Reb Chanina Nikra Chayte. He's called a Chayte Shnemar. This is by David HaMelech. He says, Belibi Tzafantim Rasech. Hashem, I've kept your words, your halacha within my heart. So the halachic rulings I've kept within. I haven't advertised them. Why? Leman le'ech talach. So I shouldn't be considered a chayta to you. Meaning, in the presence of a Rebbe, when it was inappropriate, I didn't want to go ahead and teach your Torah. So we see that otherwise, he's called a chayta. Rav Avnuna Rami, he had a contradiction regarding David HaMelech himself. One pasuk says, Ksiv b'libi tzavanti rasech, I've kept your words within me. Uksiv b'tzati tzedek b'kol rav. I went and I taught tzedek, which is the very Torah, Rashi says, B'kol Rav, amongst the multitudes. So when I spread Torah, like Kasha, the answer is like this. It depends at what point in history. When his Rebbe, Ira Hayiri, the Rebbe of David, was alive, David HaMelech was subdued. He kept the words of Torah, Belibi Tzafanti. I kept it within my heart. The other pasuk which describes David HaMelech as teaching Torah to the multitudes is after Iri's passing, when he was no longer alive. If one decides to grant all his matnas kuna, his truma, his everything else, to one kohen, he has his favorite kohen who he gives everything to, doesn't distribute it to others. This results in him bringing a famine to the world. So he was a kohen to David. What do you mean to David? David will have a kohen. He was only a kohen for David, and not to anybody else. What does that mean? Was he or wasn't he? Ella, rather, it means like this: that David HaMelech would specifically send all his matanes to Iri. See, he was his designated kohen. And what was the result? Ksiv Asrei, it says afterwards, Vahirav made David. There was a famine. So this was a result of showing favoritism to a specific kohen. Getting back to the Talmud, who is being Moira Halach of Rabbi, it says Moira Bleza Omer Marid Noisim Dulasa. From Shemaim they remove him from his place of stature, from his place of greatness. Shenamar Vayomer Lazar Kohen Lashat Tzava V'Goymer. So Lazar Kohen announced to the soldiers there when they came back from the war. He says, Hashem told Moshe all these halachos regarding Hag'olah, Hatakasha, the Kalim that we got from the Goyim. Now, he dictated the halacha, but he was very careful. Afagav de Amalu. Although he told him, he prefaced it. He said, Lachi Abba Tziva, Vaislei Tziva. Hashem instructed these halachas to Achi Abba, the brother of my father, who was Moshe, the brother of Aaron, his father. So he specifically attributed the halacha to Moshe. He didn't take the credit for himself. Nevertheless, since he taught these halachas in the presence of Moshe, he was punished. What was his punishment? He was removed from his position. The pasuk in Sefer Midbar describes Yeshua as one who is going to have to, in the future, use Elazar Kohen's services to ask him about the Urim V'Tumim question and matters of halacha. So apparently Elazar Kohen was destined for a position of authority and greatness in the future. However, it didn't pan out. We don't find anywhere that Yeshua needed his services. So apparently, this position of authority and greatness was eliminated, was prevented from, because of him issuing the halacha b'fnei Rabbi. Omar B'Levi, called the Moisef Mila Kamei Rabbi, one who responded to the halacha in front of his Rebbe, Azal L'Shoil B'Lei Vlad. He will pass on without any Vlad. The Marsha says that it means specifically a Vlad Zocher. Shenemar, where do we find this concept? Vayan Yeshua Benun Mishoris Moshe Bachura Vayomer Adoini Moshe Kloim. So this was when Elder Demeted were prophesying, and Yeshua responded to Moshe, says, Adoini Moshe, my master Moshe Kloim, lock them up. This is the way he meant to respond. So he got involved. He issued a ruling in front of Moshe. And what is the result of that? He didn't have any sons. Uksiv nun b'nai. This is the pasuk in Divrei Yamim describing the grandfather of Yeshua, and it says Nun b'nai. His son was Nun, and the son of Nun, Yeshua b'nai. He had a son Yeshua, and the pasuk just stops there. There was no continuation. Apparently, Yeshua himself had no sons. Continues the Gemara. Upliga de Rab Abba Rapop. This contention that the Einish, that Yeshua didn't have any sons, was as a result of him being Moira Halach of Moshe, is in dispute of Rabbi Abba Bar Papa, who has a different account of things. The Amar Abba Papa, Lo Yinena Yeshua, El B'Shvil Shebitel Yisrael, Laila Achas, Mipirya V'Rivya. You know why Yeshua received this punishment? That he had no sons? It was as a result of something else, that he caused Klal Yisrael to be bottled, to refrain from the mitzvah Puravu for one night, as the Morris will explain for us how that happened. And that was the punishment that he received on account of that. Now the Mashal points out that it's brought down in Tosfos, based on the Gemara Megillah, that he had daughters, but he didn't have sons. So he himself was never Makayim, the mitzvah Puravu, which requires one to have a son and a daughter. And this was an einish for him, preventing Klal Yisrael from the mitzvah of Puravu, and this was Midah Keneged Midah. Where do we find that happened? Shenemar. This was when they laid siege on Yericho. Yeshua picked up his eyes and he saw something that looked to him like a person who was holding up a sword in a threatening manner. And he proceeded to ask him, look, are you one of ours or one of the enemies? Uksiv, and it says that the person responded, Vayomer Loi, I'm actually none of the above. I'm actually a malach of Hashem. I'm one of Hashem's generals. Kani sartz v'Hashem. Tabasi. I came on account of something wrong that's taking place now, to give einish as a result. And he explained as follows. There were two things that went wrong. Yesterday, towards evening, you were vatal, you neglected to bring the carbon, and now, during nighttime, which is not really a time when you're actively engaged in war, you were vatal Talmud Torah. Why didn't you engage in Torah study? So two things went wrong. So now Yeshua wanted to know, okay, but which is the primary one? Which is, on account of which deficiency are you coming to offer einish? On account of which one of those did you come? I came on account of what's taking place now, namely Bittul Torah. So Yeshua accepted it, and immediately, meaning during the war, immediately following this one, when they laid siege on the town of Ai, what does the pasuk say? Miyad. Vayelech Yeshua b'layla hu b'sech ha'emek. What does that mean? Rabbi Yechon Melamed, this teaches us shahalach b'umka shel halacha, that Yeshua immersed himself into the depths of halacha during nighttime of that war. This was a tikkun. This rectified the deficiency that took place earlier, the neglect of Torah. Okay, so this was the account that took place there between Yeshua and the Malach. Now, what pertains specifically to us, where do we find that Yeshua caused Klal Yisrael to be bottled from Piri V'Ribya for one night? So we have one more link here. Ugmiri, and we learned, the Kolzman She'aron and Shechina Shurin Shleim Kaiman, as long as the Aron and the Shechina that's connected to the Aron are located out of their designated location, out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, out of the Mishkan, Asurin b'Tashmish Hamita. Klal Yisrael must refrain from Tashmish Hamita. The Aron, the Shechina is an embodiment of the zivug, of the intimate connection between Hashem and Klal Yisrael. The Gemara in Yuma describes the Kruvim as hugging each other like the Isha. This is the source of the concept of the zivug, and by extension, Tashmish Hamita amongst Klal Yisrael. So this is only allowed when the Aron and Shechina are in their place. But otherwise, such as in this case, when the Aron was accompanying Klal Yisrael during the war, as Tosfos explains that, generally speaking, actually it wasn't that Aron that came along. It was the Aron Shel Eitz, which had the broken luchos. But for some reason, Tosfos says that there was a specific tzibur here. Hashem instructed them this time to bring along the golden Aron from the Mishkan, which contained the regular luchos. So this is the Aron and the Shechina that is being referenced in our Gemara, which, when found out of place, would prevent Klal Yisrael from Tashmish Hamita. So we see that because the urn was still there, even during nighttime when they weren't actively involved in war, this prevented Klal Yisrael from Tashamita, from Puruvru, and this was a claim against Yeshua. And as a result, he got an einish that he himself was not Makayim Puruvru. There's a tickle Garashi inside, all the way from the top of the Amid. So all the way on the top, on the end of that first line, it says Loinenesh Yeshua. So the Gemara tells us, according to this version, that the einish Lias Ariri, to die without children, without sons, was an account of El Shabitel, because he caused a bittel of Piri Ribya. And the Gemara proceeds to describe the whole exchange with the Malach, Vayibe Yeshua, Mechsiv V'char B'shluf B'yadei. The fact that the Torah describes the Malach as holding up his sword, Mechal de Puranas, he came to give a einish. Va'ata Basi de Ka'amale Yacha Ka'amale. When he said, I came on account of now, what he meant was, Alaver Shel Achshav Basi. I'm coming, I came on account of the deficiency, the lack of Talmud Torah is taking place now. Why do you have to say on account of now? Apparently there was something else. In addition to that, there was something else as well. What is that? This is what he meant to say. So he told them as follows. Yesterday you mevatel the korban. Be'erev bitaltem atomit. Va'achshav shechashecha. Now after nightfall atum mevatel Talmud Torah. Since they were actively involved in war during daytime, the only time they had available was at night. And that's why he was giving him that teichacha. Says Rashi, how do we know from the pasuk itself how do we prove this, that his primary concern was the Torah? Says Rashi, we see from the whole story, from the developments later on, that the primary concern was Torah. Because the pasuk describing the following war says, so apparently the Torah here is highlighting the fact that he rectified the neglect of Torah. So in the following war he made sure to fully immerse himself in Torah during nighttime, when they had that break in the action. Okay, so that's the first portion of the Gemara. Proceeds Rashi, Ugemiri, the Kozman Sh'or Neshchina Shun Shleim Kaiman. They cannot partake in Tashem Shamita. Voisa Laila Shechicham HaMalach Hayu Mavadim Talmud Torah V'shvil Shoyu Eruvin Alir. So Rashi says the two things are connected. That same night that they were still sitting around that city, laying siege on Yerichai, they did not engage in Torah. That's number one. Number two, and they neglected to bring the Aron back to its place, Begilgal, where the Mishkan was. And that was the night that Klal Yisrael was prevented, was bottled from Piriviribia. And the Gemara says that was a tain against Yeshua, and he was punished as a result. So we have two versions regarding the basis, the reason for Yeshua's einish. One was the Piriviribia, and we have the other version, back in Amman Aleph, which attributed to the fact that he responded halachically in front of Moshe. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Inya mishmei derav. Gadol Talmud Torah yoysim akravas tmidin. Learning Torah is even greater than bringing korbanos Talmud. How do we know? Because when the Malach arrived to bring einish, he really could have had two reasons for that. Number one, due to the fact that they neglected bringing the korban, and number two, due to the Bittul Torah. But what was the reason of his coming? The Amar Lev, because the Malach responded and said, Ata Basi, I came on account of what's taking place now, namely Bittul Torah. So apparently, learning Torah is deemed to be something of greater importance, even than bringing korbanos. You know, the Gemara Shabbos Afir Alf tells us that Rav Shimon Rechai and his friends who were heavily immersed in Torah, Nusam, they were parted from Tefillah. So this corresponds to our Gemara. Tefillah corresponds to korbanos. So Torah is considered to be greater than Tefillah, greater than korbanos. Amar Bruna Marav, Kalal Yashin Bikila. One who doesn't hesitate to sleep in a room, She'ish v'ishto yishrim ba, in which a husband and wife are present. So he doesn't care to intrude on their privacy. Olav hakasav omer. On him the pasuk says, Nishei ami, the women of my nation, to Gorshan, based hanugea. You're chasing them away from their place of pleasure. You're not meant to intrude on them. That's not an appropriate place to be. Omer of Yosef, afilu be'ishtei nida. This is referring to even a case where his wife's a nida. Even so, even though there are those limitations, but it's still their private moment, you're not meant to intrude on them. Rava Amar, im ishtei nida tavel of bracha. If she's a nida, then this fellow should get a bracha, meaning because he's providing a safeguard here. Says the Gemara, it's not so, because a person is meant to refrain from intruding upon the married couple's privacy, even under these circumstances. Why? The adha idna. Because up until this point, until this fellow showed up, what happened? Ma natre. Who watched over this husband? Who provided safeguard for this couple? Nobody. They didn't need it. The Gemara Sanhedrin says that the Torah fully trusted a husband and wife to proceed appropriately under all circumstances. They don't need this additional external hashgacha. So a person is meant to display sensitivity and not to infringe upon the privacy of a married couple. I once had the schus on the way back from my wedding to host a chashav rav in our car, and he adamantly refused to take the front seat until my wife and I both convinced him that it was our utmost honor and pleasure for him to take the front seat. And he based it on this Gemara. He says, look, the Gemara says one is meant to display sensitivity. Be careful not to intrude upon a couple's privacy and private time. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. The Gemara told us about a Talmud who's meant to refrain from issuing a halachic ruling or a halacha b'fnei rabbi. But if it's lafrushi mi'isura, if he's coming to prevent somebody from doing an isser, and for some reason his rebbe is not initiating anything, in that case the Talmud may proceed and prevent the isser from taking place. Now, there are two categories pertaining to this halacha. We speak about a full-fledged Talmud. In this case, halacha is like this. If he's issuing the ruling b'fnei rabbi, in the presence of his rebbe, anyway within the 3 parsois range, it's asur, and he's liable to misa, as we found by Ibnei Aaron. If it's shalei b'fanav, there's no misa, but it's asur, because a Talmud, by definition, is meant to defer to his rebbe. He's not meant to assume the mantle of authority during the lifetime of his rebbe. So whether or not he's present, he's not meant to be moir halach. This second category involves a Talmud chaver, a student colleague. So he's of equal stature to the rebbe, but he learned something from him. So he's considered to be somewhat of a Talmud. And b'fanav, in his presence, he's meant to defer and not issue halach rulings, but shalei b'fanav, he certainly can. We learned about the Bnei Aaron, who were moira halacha in front of Moshe when they said you meant to contribute personal fight to the Mizbeach. We learned about the Talmud of Rebbe Lezer. Likewise, he got misa because he was over on this halacha. We learned about David HaMelech, who was careful with this. So in the lifetime of his Rebbe, he refrained from being moira halacha. We learned about the einish that befell Yeshua. According to the first version of the Gemara, it was due to the fact that he responded in front of Moshe. According to this next version of the Gemara, it was because he caused Klal Yisrael to be bottled from Purvu. We concluded regarding the greatness of Talmud Torah, even greater than Karbanos. And the Gemara tells us a person is meant to display sensitivity toward the privacy of a married couple.